Sovereign of the Karmic System. By Sometimesitalk and can be read on Novel Full. Me. Chapter 1 Daniel. This tree's trunk was large enough for a small group of men, had it been hollow, to hide inside it. Dozens of differently sized branches grew from it in all directions, making the tree reach a height of at least 300 meters at its highest point. Each of the tree's branches split into hundreds of leaf-covered twigs. Its foliage was thick, with colors that spanned from orange to red and dark brown. At its feet, a series of aggressive roots spread for meters, before sinking deeply into the dry leaves-covered soil. Inside the thick foliage, on a small branch which still sized half a meter from side to side, sat the figure of a young man. His physique was very lean, almost underfed. His black hair stuck to his sweaty face and hung down the sides of his head, as he leaned forward and tried to reach with his arm. His slightly small clothes stuck tightly to his sweaty body like a second skin. Grunts and mutters broke the sound of rustling leaves, as a pair of long yet thin fingers hung in the air, just centimeters away from a plump, odd-looking fruit. "Come on. Damn it!" growled the teenager, as drops of sweat streamed down his straight nose, and his skin explored every shade of red it can possibly turn into. For a few long minutes the teenager tried all he could to reach the fruit, but due to the sheer massive size of the tree, no other branch was closer to it than he already was. Unfortunately, the twig where the fruit was hanging was too slim to support his weight. It is important to understand that this wasn't a simple fruit, as this wasn't a simple tree. The people of Fury named this tree the Catering Tree, a name given due to the legend that surrounded it. This legend claimed that, when a worthy someone in need of a helping hand would come close to it, the tree would grow a fruit as a gift for that person. This gift was a fruit of the size of a grapefruit. Its skin was smooth and shiny, yet the color was odd. No matter from which side one looked at it, the center would always look red, while the external part was yellow with a strange shine to it. It looked as if someone constantly kept shining a light against the back of the fruit. According to the elderly, this fruit had magic properties, and although even they were unsure of what those effects were due to the lack of people who managed to obtain it for hundreds of years, they still remembered the stories from their ancestors better than the younger generations did. This made the city of Fury special in the past through the whole Carolus kingdom, and the tree renowned. Many young boys and girls used to travel from the whole kingdom to try their luck, and obtain the blessing of the Catering Tree. Unfortunately, with the passage of time, this tree caused more disappointment than anything else to the people who came to visit it. So, as it was now, the tree's powers were either considered just a legend, or a natural power that had been lost in time. This never stopped people that heard this story from trying to approach this magical tree out of greed, yet none of them succeeded. This was because, in order to gain the approval of the tree and earn one of its gifts, a person's intention had to be judged by the tree. Sadly, nobody remembered this detail anymore. The day this teenager had approached this tree, he didn't do it with the intention of obtaining the tree's gifts. He had of course heard of the myth of the Catering Tree, so after he had noticed the fruit hanging from one of its twigs, he decided to take it, and use it to extinguish a debt. A debt which his deceased mother had passed down to his when she died, the day he turned 10. This debt forced him to pay 10 silver coins at the end of each month, in order to keep his freedom, and that of his sister. Naturally, due to his age and his incapability of working, he ended up making most of those money by pickpocketing the wealthy women and men that were foolish enough to hire him as a guide or to carry their bags as they moved through the city. The city was big, and he had always been agile and fast enough to escape whenever he got caught. Unfortunately, his luck ran out when he stole from the wrong person. The unspoken rules between pickpockets were only a few. Never steal from a guard captain, never take too much from a single person, and finally, never get caught. That unfortunate day, he had managed to break 2 of the 3 rules within a minute. The reason one should never steal from a guard captain was simple. In order to become a captain of the city guard, one had to have reached the rank 4 of martial cultivation, which allowed them a superhuman awareness of their body. The slightest change in the weight they were carrying was more than enough to alert a rank 4 martial cultivator. As one could have guessed, this young man's target, that day, was in fact, a guard captain from Algro, a city weeks of travel away from Fury. Furthermore, the captain was carrying valuables from a city to another. Luckily enough, most soldiers and guards focused their training in strength and endurance, and this particular one was no exception. So, thanks to his dexterity, he was able to escape. But not before the captain of the guard had managed to take a good look at his face, and reported him to the local guards. For weeks, he was forced to roam the streets with an extra layer of worry whenever he saw the shine of armor nearby, making him unable to gather enough money for the monthly payment. The person he owed the money to was a brutal one. His mother, left without alternatives after the death of her husband, had to ask for a loan from a man her husband was acquainted with, but for reasons she didn't know. The man turned out to be the owner of a shady hotel that dealt in drugs, prostitution, and gambling. From almost missing one of her payments, she had learned that, in case she missed any of them, she would have ended up becoming a slave along with her children. This led to her working herself to death, and the debt to be inherited by her son and daughter. The reason the teenager ended up in that prairie wasn't to try his luck and obtain the fruit of this once legendary tree. The real reason was that he had been recognized by a guards patrol right outside of the city walls, where he had the habit of swindling foreign merchants into hiring him as a tour guide. He ended up being chased into the forest, and kept running for hours while thinking about the punishment for stealing, which would have been being sent to work into the mines as a slave, for the rest of his life. That was also the exact same fate that awaited him in case he wouldn't be able to pay the debt in full. The hotel owner, from the very beginning, had been sure that the two orphans would have never been able to pay the debt in full, so he already had the intention of selling him to the mine, and force his sister to work in his hotel as a prostitute or sell her as a slave. The sheer thought of his sister becoming a slave made him sweat in anxiousness. The moment the young man stopped running was only after he got out of the forest, and made sure nobody was following him anymore. He had ended up in an immense expanse of grass, with a giant tree placed right in the middle, towering like a small mountain. At the base of this tree sat an old man. This old man was sitting on the ground, in between two large roots which seemed to have parted just to allow him to sit. He had a thick white beard, like someone that hadn't shaved for years, and his hair were long enough to reach the base of his neck. He wore a simple brown robe, like the one would imagine an old hermit to wear as he roams the woods. Yet, if someone were to look at this man from up close, they would notice that the robe was spotlessly clean, and that only his bare feet were covered in dirt. As this old man noticed someone approaching him, he lifted his head and looked up in the distance. A teenage boy was staggering from exhaustion towards the tree. As the old man's eyes landed on the teenager, a dim dark gold light shone on his eyes for a moment, before disappearing. Then, a gentle smile grew on his wrinkly face. The teenager approached the tree, and immediately noticed the old man sitting near its roots. After taking a moment to sit on the grass cooled by the tree's shade, and catch his breath for a couple of minutes, he got up and approached the old man. "Old man, do you need help getting up?" said the teenager. The old man's gentle smile grew bigger as if he was almost about to laugh from the teenager's words. "No, young man. Do you need help?" said the old man with a deep voice, which resounded in the depths of the young man's mind, leaving him stunned for a moment. "Why yeah," answered the teenager slightly startled, then, with a hint of embarrassment in his voice, he asked, "I don't know where I am, any idea on how I can get back to Fury?" The look on the young man's face was a hopeful one, as his state of mind wasn't at its peak at the moment. He had been chased by guards for who knows how many kilometers, and ended up losing the direction inside the forest. More importantly, he had to come back to Fury soon, and find a way to collect enough to pay his debt, as the month was about to end, and his time was running out. "Itcha," exclaimed the old man, "how are you going to help others, if you don't even know where you're standing?" "Ha ha ha." The old man's laugh was sweet, like that of a grandpa, humored by the silly remark of one of his grandchildren. Yet, the powerful voice of the old man had caused the teenager to, once again, feel startled. "Do you know where we are or not?" asked the teenager, slightly annoyed by the old man's laugh. The old man stopped laughing and started to stroke his beard. He seemed to be pondering his answer. "I am not quite sure. I have been here for a long time, you see," he said. The teenager became quite curious about what the old man meant, as he couldn't see any bag around him. He started wondering if the old man was serious, or if he was just messing around with him. Provided that the old man looked like a hermit, and it was known that hermits were very powerful mages, capable of cultivating the spirit by tapping into the mana that could be found in the forest and allowing them to summon food and other necessities. The young man was, after all, just a young pickpocketer. He was barely aware of the cultivation that guards, soldiers and martial artists practiced. Mana, Summoning and spiritual cultivation were not subjects he had come across in his short life. After thinking about the old man's words for a bit, the young man sat in front of him. Once he sat down, he turned his upper body to the side and reached for the small leather bag that hanged at the side of his waist. He then took a piece of bread from it, split it in half, and offered one to the old man. As the old man saw this, his smile grew warmer once more, before disappearing suddenly. He then reached for the bread in the teenager's hand and took it. The young man started eating the remaining piece of bread. It was just a piece of bread, but he was happily biting into it while looking up at the big tree, which provided shade for him and the old man. His look was one of amazement. He failed to notice that the old man wasn't eating. "Your name?" asked the old man to the amazed teenager. Without taking his eyes off the tree, the teenager answered, "Daniel."
Chapter 2 the tree Daniel, muttered the old man to himself, while looking at him with interest. He had noticed Daniel's casual attitude and the generosity in offering food to a complete stranger. He had also noticed the ruined state of his unfitting clothes, which made it clear that the boy was not living a good life. These thoughts came and went in the span of seconds, which Daniel spent admiring the beautiful tree and its branches that extended right above his head. He could hear the chirping of birds, but he was unable to see any of them. He could hear the rustle of leaves, but he couldn't feel any wind. The tree was still as a mountain, and yet felt like the most living thing that he had ever set his eyes upon. After what seemed like minutes, he heard a voice which interrupted his admiring gaze. "Do you like the tree?" asked the old man to the still amazed Daniel. Without moving his eyes from the tree, Daniel answered yes. "What kind of tree is this?" I don't know if this tree has a kind. All I know of this tree is that it has a single fruit hanging from one of its twigs. I would have tried to reach for it, but I am old now, and a fall from any of its lowest branches would kill me. "Perhaps you should try," said the old man in a gentle manner. Daniel kept looking upwards, almost refusing to take his eyes off the tree, and responded, "Just one fruit? Such a big tree. That's disappointing." The old man smiled underneath his thick beard. "It is not just a simple fruit. And this is not just a big tree. This is said the old man, with hints of pride in his voice. Daniel's attention had been piqued by the odd tone in the old man's voice, but when he finally looked down, the old man had disappeared. The shock of the old man disappearing stayed with him for a few seconds. He looked around, checking if the old man had just gotten up and left, but he found nothing. His look went back to the big tree, still amazed by its sheer sight. He wondered what kind of tree was so special to deserve a name, and what kind of special fruit would its branches grow. His main concern was getting back to the city. It was starting to get late, and the forest's beasts became fiercer at night, which made the forest a dangerous place to linger in for unranked mortals such as himself. Unfortunately, without a better option, Daniel was left with no choice but to climb the big tree up to the top in hope to get a better view of its surroundings and find his way home. The thought of obtaining the tree's fruit never crossed his mind, as the tree was so big that it would take him days to fully search it. Also, he had no idea of what the fruit looked like. Daniel approached the large trunk and noticed the thickness of its bark. After making sure that it was solid enough to hold his full weight, he started to climb it right away. He had always been a good climber. His experience in running away from guards and angry customers had turned him into an agile city monkey, so it wasn't a problem for him to climb a tree, especially one so large and with so many footholds. Speed and agility will take you further than sheer strength, his father used to tell him. Strange thing said by a soldier at the second rank of the martial cultivation, thought Daniel, while sighing. His father had been sent in the front line when Carolus had been at war with a neighboring kingdom. The numbers of the two armies was similar, but unfortunately, the outcomes of wars were decided by high-ranked martial artists and mages. A rain of meteors, summoned by a powerful dual elementalist mage, had decimated Carolus' army before the arrival of their strong warriors. Amongst the deceased was Daniel's father. Daniel had always considered his father's death as a pointless one. He used to think that his father would have become a powerful man, as he had big dreams and wished to do good things in his life. Of course, whose father wouldn't be the strongest to a 6-year-old child. Daniel missed him dearly, causing him to be saddened whenever he recalled any of his words. However, his current state of mind was one of anxiousness, so he didn't let himself be caught by sorrow. Not at this time. He had his big sister to take care of. His sister was 16 years old, very smart, and just as beautiful. Their father used to overact while joking about thanking the heavens and whomever was looking up for him from high above for allowing his daughter to take her beauty and intelligence from his wife and not from himself. They both missed those moments. When Daniel learned of the death of his father, he swore to himself that he would grow up into becoming a powerful warrior like him and take care of his mother and sister. Unfortunately, sometimes destiny picked a person to which was going to pile it on. For years after his father's death, Daniel was only able to watch his mother work herself to death the day of his 10th birthday. Daniel always felt guilty about his mother's death. For years, he had tortured himself with the thought that he could have done something to help that sweet woman to take care of their family, instead of letting her carry the weight by herself. This series of unfortunate events forced a 10-year-old kid to fortify his resolve into an indestructible one and grow up into the young man he was now. He was in fact willing to die before accepting that anything bad would happen to his sister. All these awful memories went through Daniel's mind as he climbed the tree trunk bit by bit. It took him 2.5 hours to reach the top of the tree, and it was already early afternoon. One of Daniel's prey were the rich merchants that arrived to the city early in the morning. He had gotten used to intercepting them a few meters away from the city gate and offer his services to them. When he had gotten recognized by the guards, he had been forced to escape through the forest and start a lengthy pursuit that lasted all morning. As he reached for the highest, yet unstable branches of the tree, he climbed over them and took a look at the scenery around. It didn't take long for him to see Fury in the distance, as it was just about 5 kilometers from the prairie. Luckily, the forest trees weren't as tall as Ua, or he would have never been able to see the 100 meters tall walls of the city. One thing Daniel didn't consider was how long it would take him to get down from the giant tree, as climbing down was much more time-consuming than climbing up. If he didn't come down fast, he would end up having to go through the forest at night. And that was something he really didn't want to do, as the ranked beasts which inhabited the forest mostly hunted in the night. Daniel started his descent right away. Branch after branch, he managed to get down 50 meters in about an hour, yet almost slipped down twice. He had never been a lucky person to begin with, but sometimes something happened which reminded that to him as heavily as a sound slap to the face. This time, it was the snap of a branch right underneath his feet. His attempt at grabbing anything at all turned out to be useless as he started falling. Snap, 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 one branch after the other started snapping under Daniel's weight, slowing his descent. Yet Daniel didn't feel as good about it, as each and every one of those branches had hit his body like a solid kick. As Daniel thought he would fall the whole height of the tree and into his death, a larger branch stopped his fall, offering him a hard surface to land harshly upon. The land was a painful one, yet he survived. Overall, he felt lucky that the branch was there. After checking his body, Daniel realized that none of those snapping sounds came from his bones, and that the only injuries he had were various bruises and some scratches. After popping the bones of his shoulders and lower back, he decided to get his bearings and assess his situation. He had fallen for 50 meters, reaching about halfway through the foliage-covered part of the tree. That wasn't so bad. It saved me an hour. Maybe I should try again, joked Daniel by himself, trying to lift his own morale. After fixing his clothes and rubbing the sore bruises on his body, he looked around for a safe branch to use to climb further down. He wasn't having much luck, as most branches were too far for a safe landing, so he decided to walk on the branch he was standing on toward the trunk and climb the thick bark all the way down, or at least until he would be able to find a better alternative. It was at this moment that he noticed it. Hanging from a twig, just a bit more than 1.5 meters from the branch Daniel was standing on, a grapefruit-sized fruit was shining dimly. It looked very similar to the miniature of a lunar eclipse. The words of the old man rang inside Daniel's mind. Not just a simple fruit. Curiosity took over him, so he extended his arm as much as he could and started reaching for the fruit. Of course, his bad luck kicked in as he realized that the part of the branch he would need to stand on in order to reach the fruit was too thin to withstand his whole weight. It took him 10 minutes to wrap his legs around the branch and slowly advance towards the fruit. When he found himself in the right position, he reached for the fruit once more. Just a couple of centimeters separated his fingertips from the fruit's smooth surface. He could have reached the fruit if he let go of the branch with both hands, but he would lose his balance with the slightest gust of wind. Nevertheless, he didn't want to give it up. He was so close to it. Come on. Damn it, growled Daniel as sweat covered his body, causing his clothes to stick tightly on his skin. This went on for a couple more minutes, until under a moment of exasperation, he let go of the branch and managed to grab the fruit with both hands. Daniel found little time to celebrate his success, as the first thing he heard right after was the very familiar snapping sound of wood. Snap, his unfortunate descent sped up once again. As he fell from the branch, he started crashing once more against any other branch he found on his path. The closer he got the lower part of the tree, the more branches there were that could slow his descent, but they were also thicker. After crashing heavily against half a dozen thick branches, he felt the pain of his bones snapping one after the other whenever he came in contact with a branch. It didn't take long for him to fall unconscious. As he kept falling, the branches of the tree suddenly started to move. Looking like moving heaps of leaves, they intercepted Daniel's fall. At the same time, the roots of the tree started to crawl from underneath the ground like giant earthworms and formed a huge slide whose highest point reached right underneath Daniel's falling body, right beneath the leafy part of the tree. He had reached the ground unconscious. The grapefruit-like fruit stuck tightly to his palm since the moment it had been picked from the tree. An old man stood nearby the unconscious Daniel. His dark gold eyes started to shine lightly, along with the fruit that Daniel was holding on to. A gentle smile grew on his face once again. When Daniel woke up, the first thing he noticed was that it was late evening. He got up and looked at his body in confusion. Confusion turned into shock when he noticed that none of his injuries were there, be it the shallow scratches and the sore bruises from the first fall, or the bones he felt breaking before losing his senses. None of them was there anymore. He also noticed that the fruit was nowhere to be seen. Chapter 3 ranked beasts in the middle of a prairie, surrounded by a thick forest, stood a massive tree. Underneath this tree, the figure of a young man picked itself up from the ground. This young man's clothes were tattered, dirty, and clearly a size too small for his body. His slightly long black hair had dry leaves and broken twigs stuck in them, and covered his face almost completely. Once the young man got back on his feet, he started touching his own body in search of injuries, but to his surprise, there were none. Relieved yet skeptical about not being injured in the slightest after such a lengthy fall, a new spark of faith towards his otherwise bad luck was ignited within the young man's mind. While still perplexed, he ran his fingers through his hair. As his hair were moved aside, a handsome face was uncovered. He had a diamond-shaped face, bordered with a sharp jawline, which merged into a slightly pointy and protruding chin. Underneath a straight and well-defined nose were a pair of thin lips of a healthy rosy color, which almost completely covered a set of pearly white teeth. His straight and naturally full eyebrows stood above a pair of sharp, upturned eyes evenly spaced apart. In between the young man's eyelids, an ivory-white sclera surrounded a pair of umber-colored pupils, which changed into a lighter shade the closer it got to the black ring that enclosed them. After one look at the young man's eyes, anyone would see the decisiveness this youth had to adopt in order to take care of himself. In fact, his calmness after such a fall would surprise many. One would also notice, to the unbeknownst of the young man, a very thin layer of golden light laying at the bottom of his pupils. "You look worse than when I've left you, Daniel," said a voice that came from behind him, along with a deep and slow laugh. Daniel turned around and noticed that the voice belonged to the old man who he had lost sight of earlier that day. He was standing a full head taller than Daniel, which was not short by any means for his age, his eyes still giving off a dim shine, and his smile still gentle. What broke Daniel out of the surprise of seeing the old man once again was the urgency he felt to go back to his sister. He hated leaving her alone, and the idea of making her spend a night in the city by herself made him anxious. After finishing to brush the leaves and twigs off his hair, he looked towards the old man, but as he was about to start talking, the old man's voice anticipated him. "It is clear that you have somewhere to go. Don't worry about me. You'll be fine here alone," said the old man, with a gentle smile always present. He then added, "I've been here for a long time." Daniel had the intention of guiding the old man back into the city, since he wasn't sure if any ranked beast would leave the forest to the prairie and hunt for prey. But after realizing that the old man looked fine despite not having a bag or a weapon, he convinced himself that the old man was probably capable of taking care of himself. As Daniel was about to bid farewell, once more, the old man interrupted him. "The fruit you've picked, make no mention of it to anyone," said the old man as the warm smile suddenly left his face for the first time since the two met. "Good and evil exist in this world, more clearly than you can imagine," added the old man slowly, while turning to look at the massive tree that stood still in the scenery. His figure then disappeared into thin air. Daniel's surprise was at its peak, yet he managed to say out loud, "Wait, who are you?" Unfortunately, nobody was around to answer. Yet, a familiar, deep voice resounded through the entire prairie, shaking Daniel's soul to its core. "I have already told you that." "H-A-H-A," answered the voice, before a loud laugh started to reverberate in the air, forcing the grass to bend in awe. As the thundering laugh ended, the last words Daniel heard from the domineering voice left him dumbstruck. "Farewell, Dan of the Heels," said the voice before disappearing completely. It took a few minutes for Daniel to leave that surprised state of mind and remember why he was so anxious before. Unfortunately, it was too late to avoid going through the forest at night. He was aware that traversing the forest at night would take far longer than it took him to get here. His sense of direction wasn't bad. The only reason he got lost and ended up finding Yua was because he had been chased for hours. What could prevent him to have a safe and short travel through would be only one thing: beasts. The city of Fury had been built nearby the legendary tree on purpose. A small group of settlers had discovered the tree during one of their travels, and after one of them had obtained its gifts, they named it the Catering Tree and decided to settle close to it. When the city was at its earliest stages, many martial artists and mages traveled to Fury in order to obtain the blessing of the tree that had caused the ranked beasts which inhabited the forest between the city and the tree to be hunted to a state of near extinction. What was left of them were the lowest ranks. The strongest ranked beasts that had been reported were of the second rank, which any patrol of city guards could kill. The remaining low-level beasts which inhabited the forest had turned into prey of unranked hunters. Their ranked cores would still be collected by hunters, but their value was small, that cultivators with the slightest amount of wealth was able to afford them, without having to hunt the beasts themselves. Furthermore, those who had reached the rank of those beasts were unwilling to risk their lives to hunt for the cores in the forest at night. Of course, even though cheap, Daniel would have never been able to afford one. He had to work hard only to reach the required amount of money for his monthly payments, and what was left of it was used to take care of his sister and himself. One could see how that was barely enough from the tattered state of Daniel's clothes, or by his underfed physique. Daniel entered the forest at sunset. For the first hour, he saw nothing more than a few unranked beasts, which at their worst made a bush rustle nearby him. After 2 hours, he started to hear roars and howls in the distance, but none of the beasts they came from. Almost ready to thank the unusual behavior of his luck, he heard the sound of water, and it was close. When he reached the source of the noise, he noticed a large pond at the base of an enormous boulder. The surface of this pond was covered in broken twigs, floating leaves, and water plants, things which made seeing through them very hard. Unsure if he should take the gamble, he waited for a few minutes behind the trees that surrounded the large pond. He was about to approach the bank of the pond himself, when a rabbit-like creature approached it from the other side. This rabbit-like creature was very large, probably enough to not fit in a big cauldron. It had bright red eyes that shined in the dark, and a snow-white fur. Two long and thin horns grew on its head, right at the base of its fluffy ears. Daniel had heard of this beast from his father. It was called bloody-eyed hare, and it was a rank 1 beast of the lowest level. Considered by many as the weakest of all the ranked beasts due to its vegetarian nature, its combat prowess was lower than many carnivorous, unranked beasts. The only way it had to evolve was by consuming spiritual herbs, which were far too rare for an entire species to thrive on. This had put it at the bottom of the food chain. Daniel observed the beast for a couple of minutes. As it sniffed around while approaching the bank of the pond, then it started to drink its water. Daniel's stomach started to grumble. He had only eaten half of the piece of bread which he had taken with him when he left the house in the morning, and that was enough for him. But he hadn't expected that he would not be able to come back for a full day. The idea of getting back home to his sister with a blood-eyed hare hanging from his shoulders was too enticing. He reached for the ground with his arms and grabbed a rock. This beast shouldn't be dangerous. And if I miss, I can always escape, thought Daniel as his mouth started to salivate at the idea of having a feast for dinner together with his beloved sister. The rock was big enough to do damage if it hit, but not enough for him to be unable to swing it a few times. The hare had a cowardly nature, so he was certain that, even if he failed to bash the rock on the hare's head, the beast wouldn't fight back and just escape. As Daniel left the cover of the trees and approached the hare from behind, he held the rock tightly in his hand. Step after step, he got closer until there were less than 10 meters in between them. But the moment Daniel was about 5 meters away from it, the blood-eyed hare suddenly stood up in place and straightened its long ears. Daniel thought that he had been sensed by it, but since the beast didn't leave, he stood completely still, hoping that it would relax once more and allow him to hit. A minute didn't pass before a giant open mouth full of long, sharp teeth appeared from underneath the water and shoot tightly on the white ball of fur, biting off half of the hare's body. Terrified by the sudden appearance and the gory show, Daniel stood paralyzed, a few meters away from the 2 meters long crocodile head that had just popped out of the water. As the crocodile moved out of the water to scarf the remaining half of the hare's body, Daniel was able to see the beast more clearly. The crocodile had 3 sets of yellow-colored grooves that went through his entire length, starting from the back of his head and all the way down its tail. The end of its tail was deformed as compared to a normal crocodile. It had the shape of a spiked mace, which the crocodile clearly used to hit its enemies during a fight. The last detail that Daniel noticed were the 2 oddly long teeth moving up from the sides of the beast's nose, looking like a pair of straight horns. This crocodile was called yellow-striped caiman, and it was a rank 3 beast. Of course, Daniel was unaware of what this beast was. The forest surrounding Fury was said to have no beast above the 2nd rank, and that had been the case since many years before Daniel's or his father's birth. Inside Daniel's mind, the type of beast this crocodile was possibly the last thing he needed to know. His only thoughts were on how to escape this predicament. None of his muscles moved, as his eyes were stuck on the beast's teeth, which still dripped with the hare's blood. Crocodiles could stay still for a very long amount of time, so minutes passed as a young man and a giant crocodile looked at each other without moving. Daniel grew increasingly calmer, to a point where he was surprised to find himself angry at the giant crocodile for having stolen his prey. Of course, that thought came and left in the span of a few moments. His full focus was still on the crocodile's movements. After a couple more minutes of waiting, Daniel noticed the giant crocodile starting to slowly step back and entering the water once more. Confident that the beast had given up on catching him, possibly because it didn't have the element of surprise, Daniel took a step back as well. Unfortunately, Daniel couldn't be more mistaken, as the moment he stepped back, the half-submerged crocodile sprung out of the water and rushed towards him. "Shit!" Daniel exclaimed, before turning around and taking off into the forest. Chapter 4 Battle Between Beasts. Thursday thump, Thursday thump, Thursday thump. Daniel's heartbeat resounded heavily in his ears, yet unable to distract him from the loud noises which the large crocodile made while chasing him. One may think that a crocodile would have difficulties in moving through a forest, but the legs of the yellow-striped caiman were long enough to allow it to avoid most obstacles. "Stop chasing me, damn lizard!" cursed Daniel while gasping for air. In this part of the forest, the trees were a good 30 meters tall at the very least and full with autumn-colored leaves. Their trunks weren't large, but their branches extended widely. The thick foliage formed a large blanket that prevented most of the moonlight from shining through. This had affected Daniel's visibility more than his pursuers, due to the fact that ranked beasts were used to hunt at night. So most of them, to a certain extent, had the ability to see clearly in the dark. Provided that the yellow-striped caiman was an aquatic predator, and it moved out of water when pouncing at its prey, it was still a subaqueous beast. The main way the crocodile had to sense a prey was by feeling movements and changes in pressure in the water while it stood submerged in it. That was the reason why, when the bloody-eyed hare drank from the water, it had been alerted. Daniel assumed that the crocodile's only way of hunting was by hiding under the edge of the pond and wait for an unsuspecting animal to come to drink, like any unranked crocodiles would do. What Daniel didn't know, however, was that most ranked beasts above rank 3, other than being fiercer than any rank 2 beast, they also developed a certain extent of intelligence. The rank 3 yellow-striped caiman was a peak hunter amongst rank 3 beasts, and if it had the possibility of absorbing the beast core of another similarly powerful beast, it could evolve into a rank 4 beast. The severe lack of powerful beasts in this forest was the reason why the yellow-striped caiman had such a difficult time finding a suitable prey. So it had remained at the peak of the rank 3 for dozens of years, limiting its intelligence to that of an extremely ferocious and violent 5-year-old human. Unfortunately, it was still enough to give Daniel a hard time in shaking it off. What Daniel expected far less than the relentless pursuit of, how he liked to call it in his mind, damned, oversized lizard, was that a pair of bright yellow eyes were quietly following both him and the yellow-striped caiman from the distance. After half an hour, the crocodile was still hot on Daniel's pursuit. His gasps for air could be heard a dozen meters away. He was starting to feel difficulties in avoiding to stumble on tree roots or small leaves-covered ditches. The crocodile was a mere 10 meters behind him, and it didn't show any signs that it would stop its pursuit anytime soon. One long hour passed. Daniel could feel his muscles scream in pain at every step. This was nothing like escaping from the guard patrol, as the view wasn't obstructed by darkness, and it was easier for him to avoid obstacles. But in spite of everything, he kept running. The more tired he grew, the more he felt the need to look back and worry. The crocodile didn't make any progress in its pursuit, because whenever it got too close, Daniel would promptly hide behind a tree and slightly change direction before running off again, so that the crocodile would waste a few precious seconds to circle the tree to continue the chase. Inside his mind, Daniel was cursing at the crocodile in 1,000 different ways. His tiredness and worry started to affect his thoughts, badly enough to make him do mistakes. Daniel made such a mistake in the worst possible moment. The realization of having stumbled over a hidden tree root hit him before touching the ground. He had no words to regret, not paying more attention to where he was going. All he could do was recover from the fall, crawl over the roots of the tree, and hide behind its trunk. Unable to run anymore, he tried to shift his body in order to keep himself opposite from the mouth of the crocodile. The trunk wasn't large by any means, just enough for Daniel to keep himself out of the crocodile's reach. He could smell the bloody stench that came from the crocodile's mouth. After making almost a full circle around the tree, Daniel noticed a big set of tree roots just a few meters away from him. The tree's roots were thick and tightly intertwined together, but there were parts where they were far apart enough to allow a small-sized human to crawl in between. Daniel didn't have to find pros and cons, as by staying out in the open he would eventually die. So after circling the tree once more time, he kicked the trunk had been pressed on with the root of his foot. Hand rapidly rushed towards the tree roots. It took him only 2 large steps and a dive to reach for the root's nest, which was little enough to give him a chance to rapidly crawl in between the roots and under the tree. The crocodile was unable to reach him in time, as it had to circle the tree and straighten his body before rushing at its prey. Nevertheless, after it did, it still rushed at Daniel's hiding place. Daniel flattened himself against the earthy ground, on the opposite side to the entrance of this naturally made nest, while the mouth of the crocodile crashed on the thick roots. Snapping sound could be heard one after the other, as Daniel shivered in place. The sharp, bloody teeth of the crocodile hacked at the wood left and right, tried to enlarge the gap between the roots in order to reach the young man hidden inside. As Daniel was about to forego his courage and start to pray to whichever god he could think of, he heard a loud hiss coming from the mouth of the crocodile, whose big snout backed out as if it had given up on him. What Daniel heard afterwards made his skin crawl. A loud yet soul-shakingly deep growl rumbled in his head, followed by a loud roaring noise. He slowly approached the barrier of roots and took a peek at the scenery outside. The crocodile was turning around aimlessly, as if unable to see the position of its enemy, while a dark shadow kept dashing from bush to bush around it. After a few minutes of threatening verses, the shadow rushed towards the big crocodile and jumped on its back. The moment the shadow attacked the crocodile, Daniel managed to have a clear view of the beast. It was a panther-like animal with pitch-black fur and long, thin ears that floated in the air almost magically as it dashed at impressive speed. Its length from tail to head was at least 5 meters, and it weighed at least 300 kilograms. The pitch-black fur, which fully absorbed the moonlight, was completely devoid of any sort of shine, making it very hard to see clearly. Daniel couldn't recognize the beast, yet many in the past feared it. The beast's name was Shadow Tracker, and it was an evolved form of panther at the peak of the third rank. Its habit was to slowly follow its prey and attack during a moment of distraction. The panther's interest had been piqued when it noticed the large crocodile on a mad rush through the forest. It wasn't unusual for a strong beast to hunt one of its peers, especially when considering that beasts evolved when consuming other beast cores. For a high-ranked beast to attack another at first sight, in a place where highly ranked beasts were almost impossible to be found, it was to be expected. The moment the big paws of the panther landed on the crocodile's back, it pounced directly at the back of its head. Its teeth sunk in between the crocodile's scales and dug deeply as the panther tried to tighten its jaw. The crocodile wasn't any less fierce than the panther. Without giving the panther enough time to tear at its flesh, the crocodile pushed its frontal and rear left legs heavily against the ground and rolled its entire body, crushing the panther underneath its massive weight. As the crocodile moved away, in order to assume a position that could allow it to rush and bite at its enemy, the panther claws hooked at the crocodile's belly scales, ripping them off. The crocodile hissed loudly as it stepped away. Its spiked tail swinged left and right until it hit the leg of the panther, leaving it with a bloody gash. The two animals fought fiercely, adding injury upon injury on one another. Their strength was comparable, and Daniel couldn't say which beast held the upper hand, since both were covered in cuts and were visibly tired. Daniel's umber eyes never moved from the fighting beasts, the dark gold light at the bottom of his pupils still present, and slightly brighter than it was before. The fight between the ranked beasts had come to a stalemate. Every damage was given back in full, no matter who attacked first. Both of the beasts' intelligence had reached the limits of the third rank, which paired with their instincts, made them both very dangerous beasts. The crocodile had a bite mark on the back of its neck, injury that it had earned at the beginning of the fight. Its side had various scales missing, and a few that had penetrated its own flesh. One of its legs was broken. Its tail had a large chunk of meat missing, ripped by the Shadow Tracker's sharp teeth, and lastly, one of its eyes was gone. The panther's injuries were more difficult to see. 2 patches of shiny black fur were drenched in blood and stuck tightly against the hidden twin injury that it had suffered to both sides of its chest when it had been viciously bitten by the crocodile. Its leg also had a visible gush from which bright raw flesh could be seen. The crocodile often retorted to the panther's attempts to bite its neck with rolling on place and crushing it underneath its weight, while the panther used the fact that it took time for the crocodile to turn into a suitable position to dash and bite, and hooked the crocodile's scales with its claws, ripping them off and tearing at its flesh. Aside from the various wounds, the two animals had one major debilitating injury each. The crocodile's skin was covered in cuts, and a good part of its scales were missing. The blood loss was nearing deadly levels. One of its legs was also broken, which made rolling and holding its full weight a very painful experience. On the other hand, while the panther could resist its fleshy wounds, its breath was visibly slowed. In fact, if one had been able to clearly see the panther's condition, they would have noticed that it had a broken rib, which had punctured one of its lungs. Daniel was sure that the battle was about to come to an end. As he looked at the two, injured yet more dangerous than ever, beasts, he thought about how humans could grow powerful enough to fight on par with them. His thoughts were interrupted by loud hisses and roars. The panther, which until now was staring at the crocodile while growling deeply, circled around the long body of the massive reptile. Before the crocodile could turn around and face the panther openly, its neck had already been bitten through. The crocodile reacted rapidly by pushing its weight with its fore and broken hind leg. His body rolled on itself, forcing the panther to back away rapidly or be crushed again, but unexpectedly, that wasn't the crocodile's main attack. When the crocodile completed its full roll and found itself back on its forelegs without wasting a moment, it whipped its mace-like tail at the backing panther, hitting it squarely in the thorax. The panther flew for a few meters when its path was interrupted by a large tree trunk which broke its spine in half, killing it on the spot. The Shadow Tracker had died. Chapter 5 mishap turned into blessing. The sudden death of the Shadow Tracker had left Daniel worried, to say the least. He expected that the crocodile would turn its attention back on him at any moment. So in his mind, dozens of ideas on how to escape were made and discarded. What he did not expect was for the yellow stripe caiman to collapse on the ground. Fresh blood oozed from its injuries, which were way more severe than Daniel had thought. For a few long minutes, the crocodile stood still. Its large belly pressed on the ground, and its leathery eyelids blinked slower the more time passed. When Daniel noticed how the swelling of the big crocodile's chest turned slower and gentler, he understood that it didn't have much to live. It took him a few seconds to gather the courage to crawl out of the nest of sticks and roots that protected him. His eyes directed at the crocodile with hostility and a still lingering fear. He had risked his life more than once because of this beast. It would have killed him more than once had he made a single mistake. The longer Daniel stood in front of the dying crocodile, the less fearful he felt. He thought about how his sister would have been worried sick about him missing, about how she would be unable to pay the next installment of their debt, how she would have ended in the hands of that disgusting man, which would have used her and then forced her into prostitution. Or worse, his anger grew by the minute. He didn't know much about beasts, but even though he was fairly sure the beast did not have long to live, he was unwilling to bet on it. As this thought crossed his mind, he grabbed a large rock with both hands, approached the giant crocodile, and bashed it over its skull. Thump! The rock hit the head of the crocodile hard enough for its flesh to flatten and its scales to cave in. Daniel's anger grew bigger after the first hit. He didn't know why such a powerful beast would follow him for hours. He wanted it dead. Thump, 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 the crocodile's skull started to chip and splinter under the bloody mess that was once a layer of durable scales. Thump, 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 cruiser, squelch, squash, 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 blood and brain matter flew everywhere as Daniel brought the large stone down against the crocodile's large skull. Over and over again. Before he could notice, he was covered in thick blood. Pieces of brain and flesh were spattered over his arms, chest, and face. The stone was so deeply sunken into the yellow-striped caiman's head that in order to get it out, he would need to tuck his hands inside the small pool of blood and gore inside its skull and pull. Daniel sat on the ground, his lungs swelling and deflating at an astonishing rate as he looked at his blood-covered hands. The first thing he tried to do was to clean them by brushing them over his clothes, but since his clothes were also drenched in blood and brain matter, that was of little use. After calming his mind, Daniel got up and looked at his surroundings. When his eyes met with the shadow tracker's body, his face turned into one of relief. He was afraid of that beast, but it happened that this panther had saved his life, so he didn't feel any hate towards it. Daniel was standing, trying to calculate the direction, when something caught his attention. No further than 2 meters from the giant crocodile's head, an egg-sized pearl was resting on the ground. The pearl was covered in blood, with small pieces of brain matter stuck on its surface and splattered all around it. Daniel would have never noticed it if not for the dim glow it emitted, which was made dimmer by the gory coating. Daniel didn't know much about ranked beasts, since he had lived all its life inside the city walls, and went out only to scam rich merchants into hiring him as a tour guide. He was unfamiliar with high-ranking Bioscores. Of course, that didn't mean that he had never seen one at a lower level. The various marketplaces weren't only places for common citizens to buy pottery, clothes, or other items of common use. In fact, most of them had a vast choice of weaponry, armory, elixirs, and even beast cores. When he was a kid, his father had taught him that cultivators were able to use beast cores to strengthen their own bodies. A practitioner of the martial cultivation would absorb the core essence and turn it into ki. The ki would then be used to refine the various parts of the cultivator's physical body, as opposed to cultivators of the spiritual cultivation, who turned the core essence into mana. Differently from ki, mana could be used to strengthen the cultivator's connection of his spirit with the spiritual plane, which would allow them the use of elements, illusions, and various other kinds of magic. Becoming a practitioner of both types of cultivation was impossible, as ki reinforced the practitioner's body to a point where it would become a cage for the spirit. Trying to connect the spirit to the spiritual plane at that point would be like trying to push the end of a thread through a steel wall. Daniel had only heard from his father about martial cultivation, as he himself was a practitioner as member of the Keralis army. He wasn't aware, though, about the reason why practitioners of the spiritual cultivation couldn't strengthen the body afterwards. What a practitioner of the spirit would tell him is that the spirit isn't bound to any part of the body. A person's spirit would extend to the entire body. Laws of space didn't matter for the spirit, which had no need to reach a determined place to connect to the spiritual plane. The spiritual plane was wherever the spirit was, so the entire connection between the two was the practitioner's body. If the body was too resistant, the spiritual plane would be cut off from the spirit, making it impossible to connect the two. The critical point was the peak of the third rank. At the peak of the third rank, the body was not durable enough to cage the spirit, so most practitioners had to choose which path of cultivation to follow before advancing to the fourth rank. One example of this were the captains of the guards, which having cultivated to the fourth rank of martial cultivation, were unable to use magic. Daniel didn't know the first thing about absorbing beast cores. Losing his parents at a young age and the responsibility of keeping himself and his sister free had forced him to grow up earlier and work for the past 4 years, so he had never had a chance to go to school. Nonetheless, he was fiercely intelligent. With the first few copper coins that he managed to save, he bought books and clothes for his sister. She was 2 years older than him, and he made sure that she could go to school. Before their mothers died, he had promised her that he would have worked hard, taken care of his sister, and done all he could to prevent his sister from losing all prospects of building a good life for herself. His expression while making that promise was so determined that his mother believed in it, without the shred of a doubt. The egg-sized orb that rested on the ground, for Daniel, meant more opportunities for himself and his sister. One should know that a ranked beast core's price would increase exponentially depending on the rank. A rank 1 core could be sold for 10 silver coins, which was what he would require to pay every month to his creditor. A rank 2 core would be sold for 1 gold coins, which was equivalent to 100 silver coins, and finally, a rank 3 beast core would be sold for 15 gold coins, which was double of what he owed to the hotel owner. Daniel had seen rank 2 beast cores, so, after noticing the difference in sizes, he could guess that it was a rank 3 core. Ha 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 ha! A loud laugh bursted out from his lungs. If one were to see Daniel now, he would believe him to have gone crazy. His face was one of joy, and the loud laugh resounded for hundreds of meters. Yet 2 big teardrops were streaming down his bloody face, and he laughed with a heavy heart. He had always been so worried about not being able to keep himself and his sister free. For 4 long years. And yet, now he had enough for both of them to live a comfortable life. It took Daniel a few minutes to calm down. He had felt the warmth of his tears all the way down his chin. His first instinct was to brush his face with his hands, but that only made him cover his cheeks back in red, as his hand was still covered in blood. After noticing the blood still on his hands, he crouched on the ground and brushed his hands against the grass. He was far from the pond, so he was unable to wash his clothes, not to say that he wouldn't do that even if he could. He didn't know if there was another crocodile waiting underwater, and he wasn't willing to end up like the rabbit. After fixing his hair and brushing the pieces of brain and flesh off his clothes, he got up and started to walk towards the beast core. He never felt as exhausted as he was right now, and couldn't wait to get back to his sister and show the core to her. Dozens of thoughts were forming in his head. Thoughts like having a giant feast with his sister, buying her all the clothes she wanted, or even learn how to cultivate. Maybe it isn't too late for me to go to school, thought Daniel happily as his hand reached for the core. I could use this old book and thump the exact moment in which Daniel's hand touched the beast core. The dark gold light in his pupils shone, and he fell unconscious. A comical scene with no witness was taking place in the middle of the forest. A young man laid with his face pressed on the ground and his arms stretched to his sides. His knees dug lightly against the ground, while his hips were lifted. If someone were to see Daniel now, they would believe he was trying to imitate a caterpillar. Hadn't been there a bloody battle just a few minutes ago, even the trees would start laughing at the funny scene. In his palm laid the egg-sized beast core. Time passed slowly. 2 hours had gone by already, while Daniel kept laying on the ground until NNGH. A soft groan could be heard. Daniel's arms moved back near his chest, his palm flattened against the ground before pushing his upper body up. His face had pebbles stuck on the skin, and a blade of grass had entered his mouth when he had fallen into unconsciousness. The first thing Daniel did was look around. His state of mind turned from being annoyed to total anxiousness. He couldn't find a beast core. He searched and searched for nearly an hour, but the dimly brightness of the beast core was nowhere to be seen. In a surge of exasperation, he lifted his arms and brought them down against the ground like hammers. Boom, a cloud of dirt and dust was lifted all around Daniel. His fists, which came down like meteors and left 2 small craters on the ground. It took Daniel no time to remember how. The last thing he did before passing out was to touch the spirit core. He started to think about how it was possible for the beast core to disappear and for his strength to increase that much. He then made a wild guess. Did I absorb the core?